If Keith Haring sat down and started making a drawing in the art room, he'd be surrounded by people like there is something happening here. There's a kind of a magnetism to it.
There is something happening, 'cause there's something happening.
Do you remember the first time you met Keith Haring?
The first day of kindergarten, which would have been sometime in '63. I remember him coming in the door with his, frizzy blondish brown hair and his wire rimmed glasses. And I remember him just come bopping in the room just the way he was, cheerful and kind of happy-go-lucky. We were kind of best buds, from then. So much about him, up until the very last day he was alive, was the same little kid that walked in that kindergarten room. My name's Kermit Oswald, and we're here in Kutztown, Pennsylvania, where Keith and I grew up. I think in many ways, almost everything that he went to New York to do began here. 7, 8 years after we had known each other, we're delivering newspapers, we would race down that same street, and then, whoever lost, whoever came in second, would have to buy the ice cream sundae for the other one. But that was about as competitive as we, I think, ever were. The art class experience is what drew us to one another. You were almost certainly the subject of ridicule. There was a necessity that we almost had to bond together and support one another on a whole other level. I recognized something in him from a really early age that I had tremendous respect for and tremendous admiration for. I almost feel like I didn't have a choice not to be involved in his life and helping him in every way I could. I think for both of us, we were kind of like each other's guardian angel.
There's no other collection of Keith's work that can compare to Kermit and Lisa's collection. Much of it was given as gifts that Keith wanted Kermit and Lisa to have these works. So there's something so personal.
What's unique about the self-portrait for Keith Haring is that he painted very few of them in his lifetime. In 1985, I got a phone call from him and he said, I want you to come over here and look at a painting. I did, and there were 3 portraits on the wall. And typical Keith, he looks at me and he says, which one do you want? I took one look at the Sphinx and I thought to myself, this is the most remarkable way for him to cement himself to art history and sort of mysticism of the ancient Egypt. A day doesn't go by that I didn't just sit there and stare at it. Sometimes these things, I think, are still communicating in some cosmic way. The interesting story about the dresser and the crib. My wife and I were pregnant with our first child in 1985, and I had this memory where I went, oh my God, my crib and dresser is in my mom and dad's attic. So I drove to Pennsylvania, I picked up the crib and the dresser, and he came out in one day and painted these in probably 4 hours, packed up his stuff and left. And I'm like, this guy's insane.
This is a compact history of Keith Haring's work, in addition to being a record of a wonderful friendship.
The thing that became important to both of us was the sharing of ideas. We would share all these portions of books or essays. We shared all that kind of stuff constantly. We were each other's students. I think he always knew he was going to end up in New York.
Keith had this interior compass that brought him to New York City at the right time and to the right place. An amazing period of creative convergence. The punk scene of the mid-1970s had morphed into the new wave, no wave scene. And this was also the time of the development of hip-hop. And then Keith and his friends established their own venue, Club 57. This was maybe artistically, musically, the most exciting thing going on in the entire planet Earth at that time. People like Keith and the circle around him who absorb everything that's on the edge of culture and mix it all together and come up with something completely fresh.
I think Tony's show was the first one and the most important one for him. My wife and I framed it.
I remember vividly the opening of that solo show. Everyone from the downtown scene was there. It was the biggest opening in the history of Soho.
It was insanity.
Keith Haring was tireless. Keith was so committed to working in public, to creating art for children, for schools, for hospitals. The public has a right to art. That was an essential ethic of Keith Haring.
I think he felt a lot of pain for the way this world operates, and I think that he was always on the side of the oppressed. We created these pieces together in 1983. It was for the second important show that he had with Tony Shafrazi. He calls me up one day and he said, "We should make totem poles." I thought to myself, it's genius. Keith would come out every night and draw on them with a wood router. The line that he drew is orange. When we got done making them, he pointed to me and just said, "That's the best one." It tells a complete story. The idea that somehow religion ends up justifying this other violence against another culture is something that's playing out in our world today. But here's an artist that was looking at this 45 years ago and embodying it in works that he was making.
And then we all know this tragedy of Keith becoming HIV positive right at just the peak of his career. The last few years, Keith knew that his days were numbered and was even more energized to create work in public.
We're driving around Lower Manhattan someplace, and I remember him telling us, it hit like a stone because I knew there was no cure. A couple years later, he called me on a Sunday and asked me if I'd go down and tell his family he was HIV positive because it was coming out in Rolling Stone magazine on Monday. So I drove to his parents and sat down his whole family, and I mean, it still wrecks me. I think in so many ways, we were thrown together. I was blessed to have this person in my life, and I think he understood he was blessed to have me there too.
Even in the bleak times, there is a message of hope and deliverance. There's something deeply human about the imagery.
I wonder what he would do today with what's going on in the world. I think about that every day of my life. Is the idea that conserving and caring for these things for close to a half a century finally gives the work the opportunity to get out in the world. And that's a really strong gift because you're ultimately allowing these things to do and to be what they're supposed to be.
What do you think Keith would say?
I think he'd say, "Why did you keep it so long? Why did you need to have it that long?"